The Human Rights Act can be seen as far-reaching, some would argue controversial in the UK's history of rights. At the same time, it can be described as a somewhat cautious document that provides the starting point for a wider application of law to rights. In many ways, the freedom protections contained in the Human Rights Act were not new to people in the UK. The Act puts into UK law most of the clauses of the European Convention on Human Rights. The Convention itself was devised following the end of the Second World War by the Council of Europe. UK law has played a significant role in the drafting of the Convention, and the UK was among the first governments to ratify the Convention in 1951. Rights are sometimes described as being of a positive or a negative nature. That's to say, some can be expressed as a right to and others as freedom from. The 1998 Act puts into place 15 specific rights and freedoms, which include rights to liberty and security, a free trial, free expression, free elections, and the right to marry and found a family. There are also freedoms from torture, from slavery or forced labor, and from discrimination on grounds such as race, sex, religion, political opinion, or social origin. The Human Rights Act has been described as the start of a process. The Act itself does not expand on the provisions made by the European Convention, which some would consider as following a baseline or a minimum standard for human rights.
For many, these have been vital considerations for the future of artificial intelligence. But British computer scientist Alan Turing decided to disregard all these questions in favor of a much simpler one. Can a computer talk like a human? This question led to an idea for measuring artificial intelligence that would famously come to be known as the Turing test. In the 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Turing proposed the following game. A human judge has a text conversation with unseen players and evaluates their responses. To pass the test, a computer must be able to replace one of the players without substantially changing the results. In other words, a computer would be considered intelligent if its conversation couldn't be easily distinguished from a human's. Turing predicted that by the year 2000, machines with 100 megabytes of memory would be able to easily pass his test. But he may have jumped the gun.
the golden age of American agriculture. Listen to part of a lecture in a history class. Then answer the question. We call the first 2 decades of the 20th century the golden age of American agriculture. What were the factors that made the period the golden age of American agriculture? Who can offer some reasons?
New strains of crops, improved farming methods, and what about greater use of pesticides and fertilizers?
Absolutely. Technical advances continued to improve productivity. The U.S. Department of Agriculture set up demonstration farms to show how new techniques could improve crop yields. In 1914, Congress created the Agricultural Extension Service to advise farmers and their families about everything from crop fertilizers to home sowing projects. The Department of Agriculture undertook new research, developing hogs that fattened faster on less grain, as well as fertilizers that increased grain production, new hybrid seeds that developed into healthier plants, treatments that prevented or cured plant and animal diseases, and various methods for controlling pests were all introduced around this time. Anything else?
Wasn't there also some kind of population boom around then?
Good. Farm prices were high as demand for goods increased and land values rose. However, the good years of the early 20th century ended following World War I. What was happening then?
Maybe a lot of people, women especially, were moving from the farm to the cities.
Listen to a discussion in a music history class. The class is studying improvisation.
Every jazz player knows what he or she means by improvisation, and all writers know what they mean by improvisation. The result, of course, is a lot of confusion and disagreement about what improvisation really is. We hear about the different types of improvisation: free improvisation and controlled improvisation and collective improvisation. What does it all mean? Yes, Mary?
My dictionary says improvise means to compose or recite without preparation.
That's true, but it tells us only part of the story. As we know, musicians learn how to play their instruments before they can improvise, so they do have some preparation. Yes, Arthur?
Maybe a better definition is composing and performing at the same time.
That tells us another part of the story. Let's try to understand it more by looking at history.
Well, the banana is the first cultivated fruit. It's one of the food items that literally brought people out of the jungle, out of their hunter-gatherer lifestyles, and was there at the dawn of agriculture, which is what helped force human beings into communities. It's really one of the things that helped invent human culture. It's about 7,000 years of history, and the banana, from its center of origin, which is believed to be Papua New Guinea, spread out with people who traveled in boats across the Pacific into the mainland of Asia and all the way south to Australia across Indonesia and Micronesia, and eventually they moved as far as Africa and even possibly to Ecuador, all in this time, and all on paddle boats and wind-driven boats. For 4 centuries the Viking declined. The people of the Shetland Islands off the north coast of Scotland continued to sell their goods through the North European Hanseatic League. The Hanse's merchants bought shiploads of salted fish, and in return the islanders got cash, grain, cloth and other goods. This lasted until the Act of Union between Scotland and England in 1707. This act prohibited the Hanse merchants from sheltering with Scotland. Consequently, Shetland went into an economic depression. The independent farmers of Shetland had to sell their land and were then obligated to pay rent, eventually becoming serfs. So in a very important tense, memory is the cognitive function that stores knowledge that we've acquired through learning and perception, but also memory is important because memory frees our behavior from being controlled by the present stimulus environment. If you didn't have memory, all you'd be able to do was react to whatever is currently in the environment now, whatever it is that you're experiencing. But memory allows us to respond to past events as well as events in the current stimulus environment. And memory also gives us the means to reflect on our experiences so that we plan for future encounters. It seems to me that architecture is pretty much something that causes us both pleasure and trouble. I live in the part of Western London where I think many of the streets are really ugly, and this distresses me every time when I walk to a supermarket or walk to the tube. I do not understand why they built those buildings without architecture. A bad building has a serious impact on the people around it, which could be hundreds of years. It lasted so long, and if you write a bad book or a bad play, I will be shocked when it was shown. Suppose the book arose a little bit from the frustration, and then I realize if you talk about architecture, you will say why building are not more beautiful. Then you will say I can use such work as beauty, which is a really arrogant word. And no one knows what beautiful is. It's all in the eye of the beholder. I couldn't help but think about that actually. Well, you know that we all attempt to agree that Rome is nice than Milky Kings, and San Francisco has the edge of Frankfurt, so we can make that sort of generalization. Surely they are something we can say about why a building works or why it doesn't. So the books really attempt to suggest why architecture works when it does and what might go wrong when it doesn't work.
I actually want to caution against using the word romance. To me, romance can signify a lot of passion, chaos, instability, like we see in the movies. But this isn't always healthy. Romance can be part of a relationship, but we should make sure that it's not the definitive part. To me, the three great characteristics of a relationship are, first, healthy communication. Are you able to express your needs, desires, and issues without a great deal of conflict? And is the other person open to hearing it? Number two is equality. Do you feel like an equal to your partner? Are you both putting in equal effort? And finally, number three is trust. Do you feel your partner's loyal? Are you loyal to your partner? Do you ultimately have a safe relationship?
There's growing alarm over plunging insect populations, with climate change, habitat destruction and pesticides all thought to play a role. But now scientists say there's another culprit: artificial streetlights. Researchers from the charity Butterfly Conservation counted caterpillars at the sides of brightly lit roads. Compared with similar stretches of unlit roads, caterpillar numbers were reduced by half, suggesting streetlights can affect the abundance of insects, at least on a local scale. The scientists say with insects in trouble, we should be doing all we can to reduce negative influences. But there are practical solutions, such as dimming streetlights in the early hours, installing motion sensors, or using colour filters to modify the light.
Map making has a long and fascinating history. Both before Ptolemy produced the first great map of the world and after, up to the beautiful simplicity of the London Underground map and the precisely detailed Ordnance Survey maps, which cover almost every inch of the United Kingdom. Ancient mapmakers used to draw in hills, valleys and rivers to give an idea of the topography, the shape of the land. It wasn't until the late 16th century that contour lines were used, that is, lines that linked points of the land at the same height. But this was to show the relative depths and shallows of a river. The first time land contours were used was on a map of France, which took about 40 years to complete and was finished in 1783. The Ordnance Survey was set up in 1791, and their maps, as the name suggests, were originally made for military purposes, and the first one to be produced was of the county of Kent, at a ratio of 1 inch to 1 mile.
Nature's instruments for survival can be a godsend until they begin to affect us in destructive ways. Someone's negative characteristics can cloud their favorable traits to such an extent that we cannot see the positive anymore. In our biased minds, this person has become purely evil. It's pretty difficult not to feel repulsed by someone who doesn't have any positive traits, let alone forgive them. So We might want to look beyond the vast spectre of negativity and see that the people we resent are also carrying good within them, and that it's human to possess both evil and
Research suggests that some are more susceptible than others, especially those who are self-conscious, anxious, and afraid of being judged negatively by others. So how can we avoid choking when it really counts? First, it helps to practice under stressful conditions. In a study on expert dart players, researchers found that those who hadn't practiced under stress performed worse when anxious, compared to those who had become accustomed to pressure. Secondly, many performers extol the virtues of a pre-performance routine, whether it's taking a few deep breaths, repeating a cue word, or doing a rhythmic sequence of movements. Studies on golfing, bowling, and water polo find that short rituals can lead to more consistent and accurate performance under
What's an article? I was asking myself this very question in the post office yesterday, standing in line waiting to sign for, as it so happens, an article. A postal article. Not the postal article. Now before we get ahead of ourselves, an article in English is a word that precedes a noun, and simply indicates specificity. This sounds quite complicated, and to be honest, it's quite complicated to say without spraying everyone within 15 feet, but the concept's quite simple. The definite article in English is the word, the, and indicates a specific thing or type. For example, the train is an hour late. By contrast, the indefinite article in English is any of the words, a, an, or, some, and the indefinite article indicates a non-specific thing. For example, would you please pass me an apple? We always precede a word with, a, if it doesn't start with a vowel sound. For example, take a hike. I'm spending a weekend at Bernie's, or there's a knight in shining armor. Similarly, we precede words with the indefinite article, an, if they do start with a vowel sound, for example, an ostrich, an enormous mess, or an occupational health and safety policy.
height is correlated with a lot of things. Up to a certain height, taller people make more money than the vertically challenged, and the taller presidential candidate almost always wins. Now a study finds that your height as an adult has a profound effect on your perception of your health. Short people judge their health to be worse than average or tall people judge theirs. The research was published in the journal Clinical Endocrinology. Data for the study came from the 2003 Health Survey for England. More than 14,000 participants filled out questionnaires and had their heights measured. The study only looked at how good the subject thought his or her health was, not their actual health. Questions focused on 5 areas: mobility, self-care, normal activities, pain or discomfort, and anxiety or depression. Men shorter than about 5'4" and women shorter than 5 feet reported the worst impressions, but small increases in height at the low end had much bigger effects on perception than the same increases among taller people. Other studies have shown, ironically, that shorter people on average actually live longer.
Students live in the residence hall during the term time. Students live in the residence hall during the term time. Calcium's nutritional value enjoys growing popularity every year. Calcium's nutritional value enjoys growing popularity every year. Before choosing your university courses, you should consider your future career. Before choosing your university courses, you should consider your future career. During the examination, electronic devices must be left to the supervisors. During the examination, electronic devices must be left to the supervisors.